October 16, 1793. A crude, open-air cart clatters over the cobblestones of Paris. Its sole passenger is a woman, her hands bound tightly behind her. Her hair, once a symbol of fashion for all of Europe, has been crudely shorn by the executioner's shears. Observers note it has turned a ghostly white. She is prisoner number 280. The streets are lined with thousands. She is pelted with filth, subjected to the jeers, the hatred, the collective triumph of a nation that has remade her in its own image. A monster, a traitor, the source of all its suffering. This woman is Marie Antoinette, Queen of France and Navarre. The journey from the pinnacle of absolute power to a pine box filled with quicklime was not swift. It was a calculated, brutal, and psychological dismantling. The blade of the guillotine, waiting in the Place de la Révolution, would only end her life. The revolution had already destroyed the queen. How did the most glamorous monarch in Europe become the most despised woman in France? And how, precisely, was she unmade piece by piece, until nothing was left but the widow Capet? This is the story of that destruction. The final unravelings began at dawn, on August 10, 1792. The royal family awoke in the Tuileries palace to the sound of the tocsin, the warning bells echoing across Paris. A crowd was assembling. National Guardsmen, radical faders, and armed citizens. They were coming to storm the palace. For Marie Antoinette, it was the collapse of her world. Just 3 years earlier, she had been Queen of France in all its splendor. Now she stood behind barricaded doors, awaiting the end of the monarchy. The Tuileries had become their gilded prison after the family's disastrous flight to Varennes in June 1791. That failed escape shattered the final illusion. The king and queen were not prisoners of the people, they were traitors to them. The last thread of trust was severed. From that point, public hostility, fanned by radical journalists, intensified. It focused not just on the indecisive king, but especially on Marie Antoinette. She was l'Autrichienne, the Austrian whore. Her foreign birth was proof of treachery. In thousands of pamphlets and crude caricatures, she was Madame Deficit, the frivolous spendthrift who had bankrupted the nation to fund her pleasures. This propaganda was relentless and it was devastatingly effective. As the insurgents surged toward the palace on that August morning, the royal family's last defenders, the Swiss mercenaries, held their ground. But Louis XVI, hesitant to the last, refused to authorize the use of force. Instead, he led his family across the gardens, abandoning the palace. He sought protection from the very legislative assembly that was about to condemn him. It was an abdication in all but name. Within hours, the palace was overrun. Hundreds died in the ensuing violence. The monarchy was formally suspended. The royal family was taken under armed escort to the Temple, a grim medieval fortress in Paris. Marie Antoinette would never sleep in a palace again. Her transformation from queen to prisoner was now complete. The king was tried and executed in January 1793. For 7 months, Marie Antoinette was left a widow, imprisoned with her children, her world shrinking to the stone walls of her room. But for the architects of the new reign of terror, her story was not yet over. She was too potent a symbol to be left alive. She had to be publicly erased. On the night of August 2, 1793, municipal officials of the Paris Commune entered her cell in the Temple. She was to be transferred. Her destination, the Conciergerie. Even among Parisians hardened to the Revolution's new vocabulary, the name inspired fear. It was a dark, damp prison on the Isle de la Cite, known by another, more functional title, the antechamber of the Guillotine. From that moment, she was severed entirely from her surviving family. Her daughter, Madame Royale, would later recall in her memoirs that her mother embraced her without speaking, fully aware that every whisper was overheard. At the prison registry she was logged not as a queen, nor as a widow of a king. She was entered as Widow Capet, a deliberately humiliating name, reducing her to the common medieval surname of her husband's distant ancestors. This was a calculated act of political necromancy. The queen was officially dead. Only the woman, Marie Antoinette, remained to be tried. Her new home was a cell in the women's section, just above the river. Contemporary plans show it measured roughly 3 by 2 meters, enclosed by stone walls and a single slit window. Eyewitness descriptions, such as those by the prison reformer Jacques-Pierre Brisset, described the cells as cold, damp, and infested with lice and rats. She was at first given no bed, only a straw pallet. But the true torture was not the filth. It was the surveillance. By official decree of the Revolutionary Tribunal, she was to be placed under continuous watch without interruption. 2 gendarmes were posted inside her small cell 24 hours a day. This was the first layer of the unmaking, the systematic destruction of her dignity. The officers refused to turn away, even when she changed her clothes or attended to her bodily needs. In his later testimony, one officer, Jean-Baptiste Mycones, admitted she had no privacy whatsoever. She was a specimen in a cage. The physical toll was catastrophic. A prison doctor, whose notes were preserved, reported that the former queen was exhibiting symptoms of severe uterine hemorrhaging. She was bleeding constantly, weakening day by day. She suffered from extreme weight loss and exhaustion. By late September, her appearance had changed drastically. Observers, such as the British ambassador Lord Gower, recorded reports that her hair had turned entirely white. She was, by all accounts, a ghost of the woman she had been. In a final act of desperation, she attempted to smuggle a note to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth. The letter, now preserved in the Archives Nationales, was intercepted. In it, she wrote simply, "I have nothing left to hope for in this world." Then came the trial. It began on the morning of October 14, 1793, in the main hall of the Conciergerie. This was not a trial to determine guilt or innocence. It was political theater, a public ritual to justify a preordained execution. The courtroom was packed with spectators loyal to the radical Jacobins. The trial was overseen by the infamous Antoine Fouquier-Tinville, the public prosecutor of the tribunal, a man known for his ruthless efficiency in organizing swift executions. Marie Antoinette appeared in a simple black dress and white bonnet. Eyewitnesses, like the journalist Prudhomme, noted her sunken eyes and pallor, though he acknowledged that she maintained a firm, upright posture. Fouquier-Tinville leveled a litany of charges. She was accused of orchestrating counter-revolutionary plots, of colluding with foreign powers, namely her Austrian family, and of wasting the national treasury. The armoire d'affaires, a hidden safe discovered in the Tuileries, was presented as proof of her secret dealings, though the documents within were ambiguous. Testimony was based on rumor, distorted interpretations of private letters, and outright perjury. Her defense was minimal, and she was given no opportunity to call witnesses. But then the prosecutor unleashed the final, unthinkable accusation. One designed not merely to convict her guilt was already decided, but to destroy her character forever. The charge, that she had committed incest with her young son, the Dauphin Louis Charles. This allegation, extracted from the terrified, imprisoned child, was a political masterstroke of pure malice. It was orchestrated by the radical demagogue Jacques Hébert, who controlled the boy. Its purpose was twofold. First, to paint her as a monster so vile, so unnatural, that no one, not even the most moderate citizen, could sympathize with her. Second, and more cruelly, it was an attack on the very last identity she possessed, that of a mother. A shocked silence reportedly fell over the courtroom. Marie Antoinette, who had remained calm and composed throughout the accusations of treason, now rose. Her voice, cracked with emotion, was not for the judges. It was for the crowd. "I appeal to all mothers." It was the only defense she had left. And for a crucial moment it worked. Even the tricoteuses, the common women who sat knitting by the guillotine, were visibly stirred. The prosecutor, seeing he had overplayed his hand, quickly moved on. The verdict, of course, was never in doubt. But the analysis of these moments, the propaganda, the psychological warfare, the strategic calculation behind a show trial, is where history moves beyond simple dates and facts. It reveals how a state can manufacture a monster to justify its own brutality. If you value historical analysis that delves into the why, that goes beyond the headlines of the past to understand the mechanisms of power and propaganda, then I invite you to subscribe to this channel. We are dedicated to exploring the shadows of history, where the full story truly lies. After 2 days of performative testimony, the jury returned its unanimous verdict: death by guillotine. The verdict was read aloud in court at 4 a.m. on October 16. She showed no visible reaction. She was given only a few hours. At 7 a.m. she was awakened in her cell. According to prison records and the account of Marie Groscholz, later known as Madame Tussaud, who was present in the prison to make death masks, she was allowed to change into a plain white chemise. Her hands were bound behind her back. Unlike her husband Louis, who had been granted the dignity of a closed carriage, she was denied even this. Instead, she was placed in an open wooden cart, the charrette, the same used for common criminals. The route from the Conciergerie to the Place de la Révolution was deliberately slow. Contemporary police reports described an escort of gendarmes and National Guards. The procession passed down the Rue Saint-Honoré, the heart of revolutionary Paris, where thousands of spectators lined the streets. One of the most detailed accounts comes from Jacques Roux, a radical revolutionary who observed the procession and noted that the former queen was silent, her head held upright, her gaze fixed straight ahead. The cart ride lasted over an hour. At 12:15 p.m. she arrived at the scaffold. The massive blade of the guillotine loomed over the square. Henri Sanson, the chief executioner, helped her ascend the steps. Here, in her final moments, occurred the act that, more than any other, reveals the woman behind the myth. As she climbed, she accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot. Her composure did not break. She simply turned to him. Her final recorded words were not of a queen, nor a martyr. They were not a plea for her life or a curse on her enemies. They were a simple human courtesy. "Pardon me, sir. I did not do it on purpose." Moments later the blade fell. Official minutes noted that the crowd shouted, "Vive la République!" But other observers, such as the journalist Mercier, remarked on a momentary profound silence as her body was quickly placed in a common coffin. She was buried in an unmarked grave in the Madeleine Cemetery, along with hundreds of others executed during the Terror. Her remains were dissolved by quicklime. It would not be until 1815, after the fall of Napoleon and the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy, that her remains, or what was believed to be her remains, were exhumed. They were reinterred at the Basilica of Saint-Denis, the traditional burial site of French royalty. The fall of Marie Antoinette was more than the death of a monarch. It marked the destruction of an entire order, an entire concept of the world built on divine right and inherited privilege. Her trial and execution revealed how a revolution can devour its own symbols as swiftly as it creates them. In executing their king, the revolutionaries had destroyed their past. In executing their queen, they had destroyed the very concept of royal sanctity. The guillotine, however, was far from finished. Having tasted royal blood, the engine of the Terror was now insatiable. The revolutionaries, having devoured their enemies, would soon begin to devour themselves. The very men who sent her to the scaffold would, in time, follow her, meeting their own fate at the hands of Madame Guillotine. The Terror was just beginning. And its chief architect, Maximilien Robespierre, would soon unleash a torrent of blood that would dwarf all that came before he too faced the blade.